live in a country where your teenage son can get A's and B's in high school, be well liked by his teachers, never get in trouble with the law, and run out to buy a snack during halftime of the NBA All-Star game, and never come home because someone decides he has the right to execute your son. You can be forced to stand by as your son's killer tells the police the story that fits the new so-called self-defense law that allows the shooter to get away with murder or manslaughter. That's the country you live in if you are black in America. Joining me now is Jonathan Capehart, MSNBC contributor and opinion writer for The Washington Post, and Mark Thompson, the host of Make It Plain on Sirius XM Radio. Jonathan, you wrote today, one of the burdens of being a black male is carrying the heavy weight of other people's suspicions. Mm-hmm. And it never ends.
It never ends. I remember when my editor finally read my piece, he said that he liked that it was very good and very important, and I said, well, I felt compelled to write it because I could have been Trayvon when I was his age, when I was 17, and I still could be, because, you know, people have all sorts of suspicions, and, you know, growing up, I was told, given a list of don'ts. Don't run in public.
Your mother told you.
Yeah, don't run in public lest someone thinks you stole something, or you're up to no good. Don't run in public with anything in your hands. And then the other one was, you know, don't talk back to the police, which is a universal rule for anyone that anyone should follow. But for African Americans and for African American men in particular, I mean, that your life is in your hands if you talk back to police.
Mark Thompson, that's the way it's always been with police. The rules that Jonathan Capehart's mother gave him were smart ones for dealing with especially urban police in this country. But this was not a police matter. What are your callers on your radio show saying about it?
Well, this is one of the rare occasions tonight. We talked about it on the show tonight for 2 hours. I took nothing but calls and allowed people to express themselves. And it's one of the rare occasions where I had unanimity amongst my audience. Everyone agreed that this is frightening, that this is terrible. People were very, very passionate and upset and compared it to so many other cases we've seen before. Amadou Diallo, Johnny Gamage, Sean Bell, Oscar Grant, Marley Graham recently. But again, the difference in all of those cases is that these were police officers. This was a civilian, which probably makes it more like cases we've heard many, many years ago, like Emmett Till. This was a murder. But even the difference there, in the case of Emmett Till, you had a young man who was accused of violating one of the racist social mores of that era. What did Trayvon Martin do? He did nothing. He was just being while black. He was just there, and he had to die for that. And this is a very, very painful ordeal.
Well, we just heard in the previous segment on the audio tape, the 911 call, the one thing that Zimmerman knew about him. He looks black. That's all he needed. He looks black.
He looks black. He looks suspicious. He's up to no good. I think he might be on drugs or something. I mean, you hear all this.
Or he might not. The only thing I know for sure is he's black. I don't know anything else for sure.
Right. And listen, and that's what troubled me so much about that 911 call, Zimmerman's 911 call. I kept thinking, but that could have been me. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm just walking down the street with a bag of Skittles and an iced tea, and suddenly I'm suspicious, up to no good, must be on drugs or something.
And Mark, this is a kid who's on his way back to his father's home in a gated community. So one of the lessons here is, yeah, it could have been Jonathan Capehart, and you just don't have any idea where this might or might not happen.
All of us who have children, I have a little boy, anybody who has a little boy that plays football has a picture just like the one we've seen of Trayvon Martin in his football uniform. And I thought about that. That could have been my son. And so not only are we dealing with the suspicion, but we're dealing with the reality that is there anything we can do to protect our own children to make sure this doesn't happen to one of them? And I think we have to resolve ourselves to do all we can to do just that.
Let's listen to Trayvon's mother this morning with Matt Lauer on the Today Show.
What do you think he was reacting to?
He was reacting to the color of his skin. He committed no crime. My son wasn't doing anything but walking on the sidewalk.
Mark, he was reacting to the color of his skin.
I think your last segment was excellent, Lawrence. I think that really made the case for this being a hate crime. I hope that meeting in Washington tomorrow is successful. This certainly is a hate crime. He said he was black, and he was suspicious simply because he thought he was black. And as far as the stand your ground law in Florida, we might need to question whether or not that's even constitutional. I mean, I know we have a Second Amendment, but I don't know that anyone has a right just to kill someone based upon their own judgment.
Let's hear from Trayvon's father what he had to say about this.
To call Mr. Zimmerman the victim is a slap in the face to me and my family. It's a slap in the face to our community. My son was being attacked. He wasn't the aggressor in this instance, and the Sanford Police Department is trying to make George Zimmerman out to be the victim, and the victim is clear, Trayvon Martin, who's dead in the grave.
Jonathan, he's making a reference to some of the things the police chief has said after the fact about this, saying, well, what was Trayvon doing? This is the kind of thing that you're faced with after these incidents. In the black community, you don't really have these questions. You can you have a feel for who was up to something that might get them in trouble and who wasn't.
Right. And I mean, it just it boggles the mind how that someone as known to the Sanford Police Department as George Zimmerman is, who's made 46 calls to the police department since January 1st, 2011, to know and understand that this is a guy who has them on speed dial, a guy who, is a wannabe cop.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they knew he had a 9mm weapon, but they did know enough to hear on the phone when he got out of his car, knew enough to ask, are you pursuing him? When he said yes, the police officer said, we don't need you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And of all the lines that George Zimmerman crossed in that incident on February 26th, that is the one that is the most egregious. No citizen should refuse an order like that, especially if that citizen has a gun. A 9mm weapon, when the person you're going after is 11 years younger than you, 100 pounds lighter than you, and is only armed with a bag of Skittles and an iced tea.
Mark Johnson, that's why I had a former federal prosecutor, an experienced prosecutor, come in here tonight and say, just ask him point blank, what would you do with this set of facts? And he would file a hate crimes prosecution here based on the evidence that he's heard so far.
I think that needs to happen swiftly. I do think the authorities down in Florida, including Bill Lee, they need to do a little bit more to assure people that this gentleman really is isolated. So you don't do that. When you don't act on this quickly and you don't deal with it and isolate someone like him, it continues to convince people that this is institutional racism. I mean, he's even begun, Bill Lee and the authorities have even tried to make certain excuses for this gentleman. There are even reports that they tried to get witnesses to change their account of what happened. Witnesses who said they heard Trayvon screaming, they attempted to turn them around and make them say that it was Zimmerman who was screaming. That needs to be addressed swiftly, and if Bill Lee won't do it, I certainly hope the Justice Department will.
Well, I got a very perceptive tweet today from one of my Twitter followers saying that the local police department is now invested in Zimmerman's story,
mm-hmm.
and we can't rely on them from this point forward because they've invested in it already. We're not finished with this. We are finished with it for this segment, but we're not finished with this story. Jonathan Capehart and Mark Thompson, thank you both very much for joining me.
Thanks, Lawrence.